On this episode of Team Building Saves the World.
There's a plurality to the future. There's a sort of topography. There's a possibility space. Any useful vision of the future will seem ridiculous. Investing in this gives us a greatest possibility of achieving the kinds of futures we want to achieve. They had a greater positive sentiment for their pets than they did their own children. So first of all, they're um,
Hello, team. It's me, your old friend Richard Riddensland, host of Team Building Saves the World, the show where I speak to thought leaders from around the world, discussing variable strategies and tools to help you and your team build a better work environment. And today, we're heading into the future, talking to futurist, journalist, and executive coach, Bigwidesky's Jeremy Nulik. But first, I have to share some love with all of my supporters at Team Bonding. If your team is ready to experience teamwork through the power of play, then visit teambonding.com to learn more. Now, team, join me in welcoming my guest, a futurist whose website opens by telling us that he was born cold, wet, and naked, Jeremy Nulik. Jeremy!
Good morning.
Good morning, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on. How are you?
Where am I?
Yeah.
I'm in St. Louis, Missouri. We are experiencing all of the seasons at once, as is usually the case. This morning it was like 40 degrees. By this afternoon it'll be 90.
Awesome.
So yeah, that's how we roll. Yeah.
That's very New England weather, which is where I come from as well.
There you go. There you go. Got to experience all the seasons.
So let's start off. I always generally like to talk to people and open the same way, because my team out there really wants to know about who you are. So let's just give them a brief intro if you can. Tell them a little bit about who you are. I understand you started out in journalism, but now you're doing this. So how do you get from that to this?
Well, oddly, I think I've just always been someone who is fascinated with some kind of an underlying story or something that lies beneath what might be obvious, so that sort of curiosity. Actually, in college, I was studying to pursue science for that reason. I thought science would be the place where you're like, well, chemically, what's happening, or biologically, what's happening, that would explain sort of the realities that we run into. And fortunately or unfortunately for the people who are footing the bill for my tuition, I started working in a writing center and started pursuing language and started seeing that the way that we narrativize stories actually has a lot to do with the kind of reality we construct. And sometimes science has less to do with what we actually experience. Sometimes, how do we make sense of the world was what was curious to me when I started to work in a writing center. These women would bring in, like old ladies would bring in their memoirs, right? Or poetry students would bring in their bad poetry, right? And so you would, in reading the words back to someone about how it meant to them, like what this work meant to them, you started to see that this is how they make sense of the world. And that was what led me to pursue journalism, because I thought, well, that is as part of, journalism, communications. How is it that people construct meaning? How do they come up with something that is meaningful? And so that actually led me to a series of, the work that I did both on the journalism side and in PR, because if you're good at the one, typically you can also get, let's just be honest, paid better to hype some brand or people or what have you. And so you figure out how to position people well. You learn about brand, you learn about what that means. And there are some elements of, that same kind of question. What is the meaning behind something? What's the narrative that holds it together? Brands do that. So I did that work for a while, and I had a story concept that I was sent out on an assignment to cover a CEO, and I went to go cover that CEO at an event, and the interview just went awful. It was just a terrible interview. Everything that was said to me was some kind of bromide, like it was just sort of like, well, fail fast, like these little sound bites and stuff. And I was just like, God darn it. And the whole time I was doing this, there was another guy who approached me right afterwards who had been watching the interaction that I'd had and said that was a really awkward interview. And he then told me about all of the failures he'd had in a literal sense as a business owner. And he was so candid and he was so sort of brave about this. And I said, "Do you mind if I put words to this and we publish a story?" So I did. And that person was Elliot Frick, and he was the founder of Bigwidesky. And around that time, I had developed my own curiosities about, what is next for me. And when I started to see that what they were doing with Big Wide Sky was they were marrying sort of this concept of storytelling, communications, what have you. I do describe a lot of us at Big Wide Sky as recovered communications people for this reason. Uh, like we're the kinds of people that are used to, like, somebody came up with an idea and then they hand it over to people who are supposed to put the words and images together to
Yeah.
judge this, make it look pretty. And some of the curiosity we had was, well, what if you took those people and you applied them to the central strategic challenge? Instead of waiting to bring in creative people till after you had already figured out everything you thought you needed to figure out. What if the creative people were at the center of the challenge? And foresight, strategic foresight, is a methodology that we use to do that. So it creates this canvas for executives to begin to question in a methodical, rigorous sort of manner, like, well, what might be? What kinds of futures am I more attenuated toward? What kinds of futures did I not even know I might want? And how do we have conversations about that in such a way that we solve something meaningful, deeply and fundamentally meaningful for an organization? So that's kind of the trajectory, but from telling stories to meeting an odd person to then going and working alongside him at his company.
Is that how you would define being a futurist, though? Like, what is your definition of futurist?
Oh, very good. Yeah. Being a futurist, in the context, first of all, there's a number of people who use that moniker. But I think that, for my purpose, what it means is I I work alongside people who want to get to know the future. You want to get to know it.
Okay.
Leaders, there is this sort of common phrase that is said that, like, if you want to be able to predict the future, then build it, right?
Sure.
I think there is some truth in that. I think that there's also some hubris, right? Like, do you think that you have the leverage to actually control a singular kind of future that everyone experiences? And so what we do as futurists is we help to say, well, there's a plurality to the future. There's a sort of topography, there's a possibility space, and your ability to navigate it usefully, to come up with, like, what are the things we see out there that could either disrupt us, that could be opportunities for us, or what things would need to change and what would need to stay the same. And how do we make strategic decisions that design with that in mind? How do we design a solution with that in mind? And I mean, for my part, I think that, and what relates, I hope, to, your audience the best, is that often where this kind of thinking is applied the best is in challenges that have to do with people. People are overwhelmingly, just the people issue that exists in business is overwhelmingly cited by nearly every executive we work with as the central challenge in their business. If only the people would just get in line, if they would just
Yeah.
behave the way we want them to,
I
right?
often say how much I love my job if it weren't for the people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've thought this myself, of course. I mean, all the way back to one time I was a superintendent at a golf course, and I was like, man, working on a golf course is really fun. It's
Yeah.
just the golfers that are
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, the same is true in corporate world, right? I mean, it's look, we build systems and machines, and they always behave the way, or at least most of the time, behave the way that we'd like them to. But human beings are messy, and they have needs. They have developmental, needs. They have circumstances. All of this stuff makes them messy to deal with, right? And so one of the things that I hope comes to light when we work with companies is that generally the best way to give a commander's intention, to set a direction for a business, an organization, is to give an articulation of vision that allows for some like provision for what might happen. So how good are you at articulating vision? People don't typically follow a plan, you know? There's so many great plans that sit and gather dust. Well, why might that be? Well, because there isn't a vision that's actually animating what that plan means. People typically follow a vision, they don't follow a plan.
Hmm.
So figuring out a way around how to articulate vision is part of the function of futurists from an organizational perspective, you know. How good are we at articulating where we want to go and why we want to go there?
But how is it that you can talk to these CEOs, these corporate managers, and make sure that their future visions still incorporate the people that they have to bring along with them?
Sure. I mean, most of the time, what you try to do is you give people the most provocative sort of set of circumstances, and part of and it's a weird way around your question, I realize, because what I perceive you're asking is like, how do they account for the fact that there are people that they need to be mindful of or incorporate into their design of their strategy, right?
Right.
And what's amazing is when you put people in a situation where there's a simulated kind of future right at the outset, suddenly all those circumstantial sort of people issues, they're just not as apparent. So they start talking about what really matters to them.
Hmm.
So an example of this is we did this work with an NGO that is in agriculture, and we actually provided them immediately a scenario. We like I say, we're recovered communications people, so we developed an immersive set of artifacts in the form of a video, a product line, a product catalog, all around a startup that had started in the present day, but this was a corporate announcement 10 years in the future. And it showed them like this is what would really disrupt your business, and it would completely take away the fundamental systems that you currently have, the way that you work. And by the way, this isn't just like science fiction. It's based on research that we did and stuff that really exists right now. Like this
Okay.
stuff could happen, you know? And so what they were able to do is to start to have conversations about, well, what are we really after though? You know, at the end of the day, are we really after sort of championing farmers? Or are we after trying to solve some of the hardest challenges in the world? And so when they start to get to an articulation like, let's figure out what kind of challenges we want to solve and what really matters to us. When you take that narrative and you say from an internal brand perspective, this is why you're valuable and the kind of thing that we really need you for is to solve these kinds of challenges. We're not just here to check the box, you know. Um, you can invite people into an adventure. You can invite people into, you know, some kind of vision. And honestly, sometimes it has just the same effect of, well, I don't want to be a part of that vision. Well, perfect. You know, that's good to know now, you know, because we want to find people who want to do the things that we're trying to achieve. If there's going to be a basis on which somebody says that they no longer want to be a part of an organization, then what better basis, right? So.
So it sounds to me from the layman side that I'm coming from and all this, you're basically just talking about the ability to perceive, just the foresight of what you're going to be growing into. Would that be correct?
Yeah, it's some acknowledgement. Yeah, that like right now, today, even Rich, you have images of the future in your mind that are alive. And the degree to which you can bring them into any kind of resolution that you can articulate, then you can begin to shape the trajectory of your professional career, of your, you know, of your business, of what have you, right? So that's sort of the magic.
There
Yeah.
are many people who would argue with you that I have any kind of future vision for my
Of
career.
course you do. Of course you do.
It's all
No, I
jetpack.
mean, yeah, I get it. Yeah. People would make the same arguments about me. Yeah.
What are we talking about though? What are some of these future artifacts that you had been talking about, and how do they actually serve as the tools that organizations need?
Right. So, I mean, the future artifacts, I mean, that is but one sort of, there is a formalized method to foresight, of course. Every discipline has its method. But one thing that I think for people who are just interpreting like what might foresight mean or what could it do, one of the, you know, the sort of the a section of foresight that, if you might, is called design futures or speculative design. And that is usually a discipline around the use of artifacts from the future and their role in helping us to have conversations that are provocative in their nature. So if you think about artifacts from your past, right? I know for me, I've got a shoebox that's got photographs in it, and I could tell you a story about nearly every photograph in there.
Right.
And none of those photos are things that I actually like. Some of them are me when I was an infant, and so there's no way for me to know that that's actually reality. It was provided for me, right? But the moment I look at those photos, I'm lifted out of my present day and I suddenly begin to think about the things that matter to me. Like there's a picture of me and my dad. My father was a high school teacher and he was just working, jobs on the weekends, grew up in rural Kansas. So he's got work he's trying to do to support his family. And I can see that, I mean, he was a young man, he was like 25 or something like this, and he's just trying to build a life. So all of this stuff comes to life for me in the present day. I'm still just sitting there looking at a photo, but suddenly all that narrative comes to play. And I start to remember the things that matter to me. And I start to remember the sort of values that I was taught and the things that transcend my present moment. In much the same way, if you can provide people an image or a construct from a possible future without giving them really much context, people will begin to create a narrative. And they will begin that narrative with the things that really matter to them deeply, that transcend time. And that's the function. So, an example is there's an organization that helps people. It's a very large company based in St. Louis, and they help people with rental vehicles, right? And they were shifting the focus of what they were after from a narrative or brand perspective, from the function of being known for renting vehicles to the concept of mobility in general, right? So that's a higher level concept, a more abstract one, right? Like here are cars, there's cars on the lot, to we help people with mobility generally. And so what we began to inquire with them is like, well, what kinds of internal and what they're contending with at the time was an internal challenge around like how do we make that make sense to people in their day-to-day lives? Like the people who work in this organization, if you shift this brand to something that means something else, what does it mean to everybody? Like how do I sit around and do mobility, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What does that mean, right? And so to give it something that, first of all, is the benefit of artifacts is that they're tangible, right? So it's something I have to interpret. The second thing that's really beautiful is that they're usually, to be honest, they have to be just ridiculous enough that they force you to be provoked or depart from your present day circumstance. There's a famous futurist named James Dater, and I'm going to botch the exact articulation of the quote, but his second law of futures is something like any useful vision of the future will seem ridiculous, right? And so the point of that is that usually the kinds of realities we find ourselves in and within 10 to 20 years, if you were to go in a time machine and go back in time to talk to yourself then, you would sound ridiculous, right? Like, let's just look at the presidential candidates. And you had to go back to Rich 10 years ago and say, these are
Yeah.
the two people we have right now. And so it would seem silly, but it's reality, right? And so one of the examples of one of these artifacts is we created something we called the desk Doge. And it is a desk that you would sit at, and it actually is covered in fur, and it pants, and it has biological needs, and you can walk it around, right? So that you also
Okay.
your sort of steps in for the day, what have you. And it is something that helps to elevate the experience, ostensibly, of employees who choose the desk Doge option because it helps them to care for another thing. It helps them to care for a dependent, and it has all of those wellness sort of manifestations that you get from allowing pets in an office, but with all of the hypoallergenic qualities of not upsetting your coworkers with your dog, right? So, well, what was that based on? Because that sounds silly. Well, there was actually some research that had come out that said that people there were pet owners surveyed who also had children, and they had a greater positive sentiment for their pets than they did their own children. So first of all, um, then there's just so much research that's done on, the benefits of a focus on corporate wellness and its impact on people's professional development.
Hmm.
So their mobility, right? So mobility started to mean more than just helping their customers move. It
Right.
meant helping people in their professional mobility, helping people in their developmental mobility. How can we stimulate that as a culture? And so the deliverable on this, which we still have yet to fully realize, to be honest, is that they're moving to a new, this group is moving to a new office, and we hope to have these actually 3D objects in that office in such a way that they can begin to tell the story about what mobility means. Like, this is how serious we are and how ridiculous we're willing to be
Hmm.
in driving forward the concept of what our investment in your mobility means. So it's better, it's different than, like, we're not just going to hang a poster and say, like, we care about you, sort of stuff. We're actually going to invest in exploring what's possible.
Nice. And I want to explore more about this in just a second, Jeremy, but I hope you don't mind. I do need to step away for a quick second so I can tell all my team out there about a company I am very proud to be a part of, Team Bonding. Team Bonding was founded over 20 years ago with one simple question: how can employees have a great time while fostering strong, authentic bonds between people who work together? No matter where your company is located, Team Bonding offers powerful, engaging, custom team building events designed to get the best out of your team anywhere in the world. They've created a catalog of innovative events using the power of play as a learning tool and tapping into the correlation of work and play. So, whether it's scavenger hunts to Jeopardy or so many more, the team bonding of activities, whether they're live, virtual, or hybrid, maximizes the impact of team building with an accent on fun. Visit teambonding.com to schedule your event now. Team Bonding, when you want seriously fun results. And we are back talking about the future of business and how to get ourselves there with Jeremy Nulik. Jeremy, so what you're talking about is as soon as you said the presidential campaign, all I could think about is, for some reason, Back to the Future, that moment where Marty and Doc first meet and he says, "Who's the president in the 1980s?" And Marty says, "Ronald Reagan."
Mhm.
The actor?
The actor, right?
Yeah, yeah. So how can we bring a company that is, because many people I'm sure are like me, where they've been told very much throughout most of their lives, from early infancy onward, that you have to be in the here and now. You're too much, looking to the future. As Yoda himself said, if I can quote yet more movies, never where you are. How do we get companies to actually give themselves the freedom to let imagination become a big part of what they do?
That's a really great question. I think that candidly, the recipe that I've seen that allows for this most readily is a sort of like forced feeding on humility. COVID-19 actually helped with this a great deal, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Who had in their cards that this would be the thing that would disrupt supply chains and health and our well-being in general and all
Exactly.
kinds of communities of people, right? So there was sort of a forced feeding on it. But I think that the call to bring imagination back into the strategy of a firm, or back into how do we really set the course for what we do, it first of all, where I would start if I was just, whomever, is there's a number of ways. There's actually a format that you can follow just for yourself and your own personal futures. And it's a visualization that you can begin at any point, and you can actually even do this daily. But if, Rich, when you woke up this morning there in Boston and the cell phone lit up on your nightstand, what have you, you you woke and you made a decision to be on this podcast with me right now, in this moment. But if in this moment instead what you'd thought was, there's this place I've always wanted to go, and I don't know where it is for you, but if even you're visualizing right now, like, there's this place that I've been wanting to go, and I've just been putting it off, and there's always a good reason, and there's always an obligation on why I don't go. but I'd really want to go there, right? And so if you start to think about like, well, what would be involved, right? So if you decided actually, let's go back in time to this morning, and you, Rich, decided that when your cell phone started to glow, you decided, I know I have obligations, but this is just more important to me for whatever reason. And so I'm now going to begin the process of packing my bag. I'm going to start figuring out who I need to talk to let them know I'm skirting out on my obligations, Ferris Bueller style, what have you. And I'm going to just go to this place, right?
Right.
And if you were to start that process, let's assume you were, and it's what, it's 9:30 where you are.
Yep.
If if you were to have made that decision this morning, where would you be right now?
Well, if I
Would
had
you
made
be on a
that decision,
plane or
no, I'd be in my car.
okay.
I'd be in my because wherever I'm going, I'm taking my dog with me.
Okay, great. So you'd be in your car and your dog's in your car with you. What's playing on the radio?
Probably, probably like a D&D podcast. Listening to people
Nice.
actually play games as I'm driving. One of my favorite things.
Right, right. And so like that kind of there is a version of Rich right now in some simulated world that is riding down the highway with his dog listening to a D&D podcast. And that person he's fully engaged in doing that. He knows, why he's doing it, all of it, right? But for whatever reason, you did decide, and thankfully for me, to be on this podcast with us, of course. But what I think, even a simple sort of thought experiment like that can do for you, if you were to say, well, what if this morning I just made a different decision about where I want to be today? And then you go through the process of visualizing what would be involved in doing it. And then you start thinking about, well, where would I be in this moment? Where is that alternate version of me right now? What it exposes is the agency and the contingency of your future. Like a lot of times, the reason that imagination, I think, is critical for bringing about the change we seek is that we usually leave the responsibility for our current circumstances up to other people. And what
Right.
really is the truth, though, is that you've made decisions. If there's anyone who's responsible for your station in life or what's going on with your business or what's going on with your company, it's you. And so you can expose that agency. And there's one way to do it that's intellectual, like I just did, which is to say it, right? It's another thing to immerse yourself in a different kind of reality. Like, what kind of anxieties does that version of Rich have? Because he didn't escape them, right? There's other things he's worried about. There's other things that would be a cost to doing that you'd have to deal with, right?
Right.
But the point is, like, are those the kinds of anxieties you prefer to deal with? Are those the kinds of challenges that you like to deal with? So it can start even with just a personal reflection of that sort of thing. Now, when it comes to like executives, like I said, most of the time, it's usually when how do we begin to think about the utility of imagination at an executive level for an organization to make decisions about them? The first way is usually through some kind of like something's not working anymore.
Yeah.
Everything that we thought would happen isn't happening. And so we're going to have to examine what alternative kinds of understanding there could be.
Well, that's exactly where I was going to go next. Talk about being a futurist.
Hmm.
What, as if I were a corporate leader,
Yeah,
head of an organization or even high enough up in management for people to listen, what kind of warning signs do I need to look for when I know that I should be contacting someone like you?
it's really interesting. Most of the time it has to do with people. I mean, that's probably the lead reason why is when there is a lack of alignment, engagement, zeal,
Hmm.
whatever, that there used to be there, or you have a sense that it was, and then it suddenly is gone, and you don't know why. And it's difficult to suss out and explain. And part of the reason why is that, like I said, human beings are not automatons. So they don't just react to stimulus the way that a machine does. So it's because there's a mechanized, sort of challenge. Sometimes the other reason, though, is that, look, I know there's a vision I have. Like if I'm that executive who's looking at, do I need somebody who has any foresight understanding in this? I know there's a direction I really want to go. and it's not this. You know, I know that there's a strategy I want to put in place, and it's something's missing. Usually get called in when there's a transition. So like it's a family business and it's the next generation, or it's someone who was a more autocratic, sort of leader, and then they anointed their next in line for, however that succession would work.
Okay.
Or it's there was like an executive search done and they pull somebody in to be the CEO. But those people usually have like, I know there's a direction I want to go. And I know that I've been trying to say it and nobody's biting. Like
Mm.
nobody gets as excited about the vision that I have. And sometimes it isn't that it's not a great vision, it's that there isn't an accounting for possibility inside of it. So it feels flat to the people you're trying to enfranchise into your vision. And so those are usually most of the circumstances that surround like, why would I even think about talking to somebody with a title like futurist?
Right. So help me help them realize that you're something that they need. That engaging their imagination is something you can help them to do, and take along the company with them. I don't want you to give away the store, but give me an example of some of the things you might do to help someone in that particular case.
Sure. So, I mean, we worked with an architecture firm recently, and one of the situations they were in was that they had moved they had a founder leader, and he created a management structure to leave behind in succession.
Okay.
And there was just this sort of like, if we're going to step into this and be who we want to be, it just feels like there's this degree of like we're stewarding a vision that wasn't really ours. Like where is our part in shaping this? And so what we did was we took them through a series of foresight activations. We did research on their market. We did some landscape analysis of, what is emergent in their market, what kind of signals of the future exist because of where they are and how they're situated. We were able to certainly there's just an analytical sort of report side to this. So the first thing that usually happens with that group is that they're able to at least look and say, wow, there's actually more out there than we realized. There's just this sort of moment of there's actually more possibility than maybe we thought. And then when we lead them through a series of activations where we actually, from a D&D, you'll appreciate this, when we put them into situations where, look, you are CEO of this group. Here is the circumstance 10 years in the future from now that you're dealing with. Tell me, here are arcs of the future, and you need to help us to understand what went really well because of that future. What kind of stories can we tell about that? What failed and what collapsed because of the decisions you made? What did you put in place to keep things from going into collapse, right? And then also, what is potentially transformative about the kind of future you're creating? When you give people circumstance-based sort of things like this, right? What they came to was an understanding at the end of it, probably where in the gestalt, right? Like if you map everything on top of each other and you look at it, they
Yeah.
were able to say, what we're really after is like architecture, while it is a design pursuit and art and something they care about, is really incidental. The thing that they really cared about was serving the most deeply fundamental human needs of communities. Like they realized and they were able to coalesce around an understanding that this art that they create was intended to serve people who they don't even know, right? Because if you manipulate the built environment, it's around for 50 to 100 years or something like this, right? And so it's like, well, how do we begin to build empathy for people we'll never meet, right? Like those are the kinds of, and that has some vitality to it. It's got life to it. And so then when you start to make decisions, then based on, well, strategy it starts to get involved because it's like, well, we have things that we need to make decisions on before the end of the year. We have things that we need to make decisions on next year. We have goals. We have KPIs we need to meet, right? So how does this help us with any of that? Well, what it helps to do is it creates strategic coherence. Like because there's so many people who have ideas, right? Facilities thinks that you need to build a new whatever, like something new, and marketing thinks you need a new brand, uh,
Right.
and they have data reasons to back up why it is they want to make them. But the real issue, the challenge with all of these various sort of groups of people who all have really good data-based ideas is what is the strategic coherence that animates why we would fund one thing over another, or why we would put our resources in this area or another. And the best reason why is because you'd want to be able to say, well, investing in this gives us a greatest possibility of achieving the kinds of futures we want to achieve. So the things we want to make more possible are better invested if we move this direction, So not to give away the store too much also, or sound like such a sales pitch, but that's the deal, right? It's like,
Yeah.
what is the coherence? What girds it? What brings it together?
Well, speaking of which, if I mean, because it's been a fantastic conversation, and I can go on and on and
A
on.
terrible interview. I apologize. I'm like
No, you're
the
doing great.
soundbitey person in the world.
But actually, the thing that I really, because I know there are going to be people out there who, if I don't ask this, are going to be yelling at me as to why I didn't. What does the future look like, especially for corporate America and the marketplace?
Oh, well, I think that there will, well, first of all, I think we are at a deep inflection point in what we understand the role of business to be.
Okay.
And I think that there's something archetypal about it. And so it's almost like, well, again, you're a D&D person, right? So like if there's an archetypal quality to where we're at in the concept of business, and that has to do with like a shapeshifter sort of archetype, which means, is business intended to serve business? Is business intended to serve the human beings and communities that it ostensibly wants to serve? And so I think that if anything, COVID-19 helped us to see that we're at that inflection point. How might we make the decisions we need to make? So to me, the future of business, it is if I have any influence or leverage at all, it's intended, like some of the work we do and some of why it is I want to do the work as a futurist that I do, is I'd like to make more possible the kinds of futures that help us to see that business serves a human need, that helps us to see that business was intended to do that in the first place.
Yeah.
And not to try to also weasel out of your question, but like, well, what's the future of business? Well, it's what you make it, man. Some of it's like you have agency in shaping the kinds of things you want. So if you don't like it, there's look for your leverage points. Look for the places where you can have influence. Look for the places where you can tell stories about the kinds of futures you want to see, and find the people who care about them the way that you do, and do the work to be the sort of disagreeable or potentially even crazy or ridiculous imaginative person that if that's the level of transformation you seek, then be that, right? So, I hate to always do that, but yeah, what's the future? Well, it's what you want to make.
I think we said it. You say it all right there. I love it. Jeremy Nulik, my friends out there, please, team, give him a big round of applause. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Thank you for coming on, man. This was a great talk. Thank you. I hope you had a good time.
Oh, I had a great time.
Well,
I hope it's really fun.
I hope you continue to feel that way, because it is time for my speed round.
Oh, that's right.
So just to remind you what we talked about before the show, this section is just about 60 seconds long. I'm going to play some music in the background. You guys help me to keep in track, where we are and how much time I have left. During that 60 seconds, though, here's the meat and potatoes of it. I'm going to actually ask you a bunch of completely innocuous questions, just silly little, short phrase answers, whatever you want to make of it. The objective is, as a game, is try to see how many you can get answered within 60 seconds.
Okay.
As I told you before, I don't know how competitive you are, but the number to beat is a massive 15 questions answered in 60 seconds. You think you can do it?
Let's give it a go, man. I think so.
All right, my friend. Fantastic. We're going to hear some music. I'll ask the first question, and here we go. Let's have some fun. What's your name?
Jeremy.
How many kids do you have?
5.
Which one's your favorite?
All of them.
Do you have any pets?
Yes.
If you could ask your pet a question and get an answer, what would it be?
Why do you have to just run all the damn time?
If you could time travel, where would you want to go?
Probably to England in like the late to mid sort of century.
Okay. Favorite TV home you would love to live in?
The Jetsons?
Nice. Favorite ice cream flavor?
French vanilla.
What is your favorite movie?
Space Camp.
Name your favorite celebrity.
Michael Keaton.
Most embarrassing childhood memory.
There's so many to choose from.
I will take that as an answer.
Oh gosh.
You got 12, buddy. 12 answers.
There was some bad answers in there. Like I was trying to struggle with the England thing. There's a like right around like the 50s, in England was when I was thinking.
Okay.
I screwed up that answer. Yeah.
Nope, that's okay. Not a problem. And I love the clarification. Excellent job. Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on, man. I really did. I was fascinated by all of this. If there is anybody out there on my team who wants to learn more about you and about your company, please feel free to let us know now. Where can we get a hold of you?
Bigwidesky.com. Yeah, BIGWIDESKY.com. Unlike the there was a takeout place that was next to us, and when you'd order lunch, it would put the name of the organization on the lunch. And we were known by that takeout place as Big White Guy. That is not the name of our business. It's Big Wide Sky. So it's BIGWIDESKY.com. I'm Jeremy at that address. So Jeremy at bigwidesky.com. Easy to find us. We're always interested in any opportunity to just have meaningful conversations with people about how they want to shape their future.
Great. And hopefully in the future, we can sit down and talk like this again. I would love that. I
would dig it, Rich.
Fantastic. But as for you, my friends out there, that's it. We are wrapping up yet another episode of Team Building Saves the World. If you've enjoyed this episode, whether you're new to the podcast or an old fan of the show, please be sure to share it with everyone you know. Whether they're your coworker, your friend, or family member, it just helps us to share all this vital information. You can find out all about us, including all past episodes, at teambonding.com/podcast. You can also find us wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Wherever you go to listen, we will be there. And don't forget to look for all of us on the social medias at Team Bond Podcast. Leave me a message. Tell me whether you like this show or if you have an idea for a future topic on the podcast. We want to hear from you. So, before we say our farewells for this episode of Team Building Saves the World, please never forget, my friends, if you are within the sound of my voice, you are on my team now, and I am forever going to be on yours. So long, team. I'll see you next time.
It's been said that you learn more about a person in an hour of play than in a year of conversation. So why not put your coworkers to play with the help of the team at Team Bonding? Team Bonding was founded over 20 years ago with one simple question. How can employees have a great time while fostering strong, authentic bonds between people who work together? Their catalog of innovative events includes scavenger hunts, Jeopardy, and much more. Each activity, whether live, virtual, or hybrid, maximizes the impact of team building with an accent on fun. Visit teambonding.com to schedule your event now. Team Bonding, when you want seriously fun results.